Hey, welcome to another episode of Sports Talk Law Talk. This is Byron Brown and Jody Ayler, as always. How you doing, Jody?
I'm great, man. How are you?
I'm good, man. You got some strong opinions about Elf on the Shelf, I just learned. So
Yeah, I do.
I got two girls, 9 and 11. So we tried to get away from the Elf on the Shelf as much as we can, but you know, it's all that I think kids their age are talking about. So every night I have this battle of what am I going to do with the Elf on the Shelf? And like the pressure mounts. Like one time, I think you'd probably be the same way as me on this if you actually had to do Elf on the Shelf like which my girl comes out one day and we had like these little candles. And so I put a little piece of wood in the elf's hands with a marshmallow. So it was like she was roasting a marshmallow, the elf, right? And she like hilarious. Like she thought it was funny, ear to ear grin, all the best, right? The next night, I didn't put as much thought into it. And so I can't remember what I did, but I kind of mailed it and like, you know, put him up on like a high ledge or something, like nothing super crazy. She comes out and she's kind of like, he's on the ledge, you know, like she wasn't impressed, and it hurt my feelings because I was like, oh, I want you to be happy, babe. I want you to smile ear to ear. So now like my wife, every night it's like a big conversation. She's like, well, how about we do this? I'm like, I don't think it's detailed enough. I don't think it's going to bring as much happiness as we want. So I'm like, we really got to plot these things out. But you're free from the chains of the Elf on the Shelf.
Yeah. So first of all, I've got a couple questions about this, and I'm assuming just we're all adults watching this podcast right now. Are both girls still into the whole Christmas thing? Like, is it, because I think back, like I was probably your oldest daughter's age, maybe a little older when you started really kind of doubt started seeping in your head. Is this just for the youngest, or is this for both of them to kind of enjoy?
Fair question. So last night we had a little incident with the oldest. She came out and I had some of the props that were used for that day's Elf on the Shelf in my hands. And so she like calls me out and she's like, you're moving the elf. And I was like, no, calm down. Like, you know, this stuff, I was just trying to move it around. And like, I had to make coffee.
Your Honor, objection.
Yeah, exactly. And so my oldest, who's 11, she has said at times that she doesn't think Santa's real. And then I move the elf, which obviously she's right on both counts. And what I've dealt with her, at least, is I say, I don't admit that they don't exist, but what I say is I go, listen, you don't ever want to bring that up in front of your youngest sister who's 9, because she still really enjoys the process. And so I guess that might be my way of confirming that whatever, but because at the same time, like she's 11, like there's a huge difference in my opinion from like 8, 9 to 11. Like she's aware of a lot of things around her that she was not before observant of. So I feel like I'd be an ass to say, hey, you know what? Yeah, Santa's real, and that elf, yeah, it fucking moves every night by itself. Like, I would probably lose credibility with my wife, with my daughter, right? So, but yeah, no, the 9-year-old, 100%. She actually says that someone at school tried to tell her Santa wasn't real, and like you could tell, like she was really upset about it.
Yeah.
So,
well, that's the magic of Christmas, right? Like that's
100%.
That's the, like you said, the smile, the joy. How long have you been doing Elf on the Shelf? How long is this like? Have you been doing it every year that they can remember, or is this like a relatively new occurrence?
Well, I believe we started it when we were peer pressured by everybody else, which was about, I want to say it was 3 years ago.
Okay.
Because you know what was funny when it originally happened? I remember thinking I thought it was like a Mormon conspiracy, because I was like kind of smart of them if it is, right? Like put something up that watches over you to make sure you behave so you get your Christmas presents. Like it kind of seemed like a Mormon thing for me, right? And maybe it is. I haven't like researched it, and I'm not bashing Mormons by saying that. It just seems something to me more like angelic than organic.
Yeah. So here are my thoughts on it. Like I've got a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old. So it's a lot easier to control the environment around what happens or doesn't happen, because they're not in school. They don't have peer pressure, doesn't really exist. But I will never have fucking Elf on the Shelf in my house, because of what you just said, like it's hard being a parent. Now listen, anything you can do to make your kids happy, I understand doing it. We all do ridiculous shit every day as parents because we care about our kids being happy. I've played dolls and take on voices and also every day. So I'm not like, I understand the pressure to make the kids happy and this is just pure joy, but it's fucking hard being a parent. And to add like voluntarily onto that for a month, this like you're like Steven Spielberg for a month. You're like setting up scenes and you're like Jim Henson, and I'm like, I don't, if that doesn't have to be a part of it, it doesn't need to. And beyond that, the mystery of Santa is enough. Like I don't feel like I missed out on as a kid because there wasn't this like secondary fable of an elf in our house like Santa and reindeer and the North Pole. Like I feel like that satisfies the Christmas magic.
Yeah. Well, from one annoying elf to another annoying elf, are you familiar with Dylan Dannis?
A little bit.
Okay, so Dylan Dannis, people call him a Conor McGregor dick rider. That's the verbiage almost universally used to describe this guy. He's an MMA fighter who's signed in the Bellator promotion. He's known for being heavily skilled at Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. His stand-up game is not really, at least on par with his ground game. He's not known for a striker. Anyways, he runs his mouth a lot. He's run his mouth all the time. Before this Jake Paul stuff, he ran his mouth. And Conor McGregor has got his back, so to speak, right? So what happened the other day is Brandon Schaub, who's an ex-UFC fighter, he has, I don't think it's a podcast. I think it's just like a show for Instagram and Facebook. It's called Food Truck Diaries. And he brings on fighters and he interviews them about their upcoming fights and stuff. So a couple days ago, he did one with Jake Paul. And then just the other day, he did one with Dylan Dannis. Now, Jake obviously got wind that Brendan was doing this with Dylan Dannis. And so Jake and his crew roll up with a pickup truck and a bunch of wet toilet paper rolls and start yelling and throwing stuff at Dylan Dannis. The beauty of it to me is just like two people who more or less appear to be human cockroaches are going after each other. Like, to me, that's the fight. Like, I don't want to see Jake Paul fight someone that I like. I want Jake Paul to fight someone that I equally dislike as much as him and watch the two of them beat the fuck out of each other.
That would be win-win, right? Because then you know you're coming out of there like satisfied one way or the other. If they're just both in there beating the shit out of each other, then yeah, I mean, like, now does Jake Paul consider him is that a big enough fight? You know, like could they build a pay-per-view around that?
Well, I think he's going after Dylan Dannis for a couple of reasons. They could definitely build a pay-per-view event around it. I don't know how big it would be because Dylan Dannis in of himself I don't think is a big enough draw. But Dana White has strongly come out against this. So that's the UFC promotion. Hey, I don't think you're ever going to see a UFC fighter fight a YouTuber such as Jake Paul. However, you got Scott Coker over with Bellator, and they haven't done any of these little carnival act boxing matches yet. And that's where Dylan Dannis is signed. So I think it's more likely that Jake Paul fights Dylan Dannis than Jake Paul fights anybody, whether that's McGregor or not, from the UFC. I just don't think it's ever going to happen. And I have a friend who's fairly tight with that UFC circle, and they tell me that there's no way Dana White's ever making that fight with Jake Paul, or Logan Paul. And Logan Paul's got the Mayweather fight anyways. But yeah, I mean, I don't knock Jake Paul. I think a lot of people are mad at him for doing these things. The way I always have looked at it is like, look at the guy's doing what he can do and he's making millions of dollars doing it and people continue to support him. If you're that angry about the Jake Paul stuff, what I say is mute TMZ, maybe get off the internet altogether, right? And then don't buy any of these events because that's why we're going to continue to see these events because people make money off of them.
I just want someone to step up and deliver the knockout that Jake Paul is so clearly pursuing. Like, okay, like I get the self-promotion. I'm with you. You can ignore it. Somebody needs to just step up and knock him out, and then we don't ever have to hear about this again. Because if he gets knocked out by someone, there's no real point in having it done a second time. So what I'm fearful of is like Jake Paul's going to get a fight, and then it's basically WWE. Like, it's basically professional wrestling where they choreograph what's going to happen, because I don't trust that Jake Paul is doing this in the interest of fighting. This is being done in the interest of attention and money making. And so if you put any real fighter in the ring with him, they're going to knock him out. So then I worry, like, well, it's just, we're all being set up for basically one big, like, faux reality TV show. You know what I mean?
Yeah, you know what's funny is like I kind of see it differently. Like I've heard that Jake Paul and Logan Paul work incredibly hard at the boxing aspect. They post a lot of videos. That in and of itself doesn't mean anything to me. But the fact that these guys really go out there and they try to do this, again, I just find it commendable, because I find it commendable when anybody does anything that they're highly criticized of. Because it's not easy to do that stuff. Now, I don't like him. Like I'm not personally endorsing his behavior or anything like that, but I'm just talking about it as a whole. That's kind of, I get why people hate him, but at the same time, if I offered anybody millions of dollars to act like an ass and get punched in the face, most people would accept that.
But don't you think there is a certain part of this that's just, he's kind of begging to be knocked out? I mean, as hard as he works, it's not easy to just jump into the ring against a world-class fighter, because you work, like every boxer in the world works their ass off. He's trying to take the shortcut to the top, and I feel like it's just begging for him to be sort of regulated in the ring to a certain extent.
Yeah, like yeah. 100%. I think at some point this cat is going to get knocked out. What's interesting, and I know that you heard this as well, but Dana White came out and said, hey, I'll send Amanda Nunes in there. Amanda Nunes is a problem, man. I don't know how many people have seen, but she was the girl who first handed Ronda Rousey her defeat.
Yeah.
She's a Brazilian badass. Like, there's no other way. I have no issue, never had an issue with female fighters, but she's the first female fighter that I saw fight that I was like, holy shit. Like, the aggression was matched by the male counterparts in my mind. And like, she dismantled Ronda Rousey. She dismantled Holly Holm, with two of the girls that Holly Holm's still in the division and she's still highly ranked, at least top 5. So yeah, I would love to see, hey, I'll buy that. Amanda Nunes fighting Jake Paul and knocking fucking Jake Paul out. I'll buy that, you know?
Now that's a, I'm with you. I would buy it too. That is kind of a tough fight to pull off, right?
100%.
Because you're asking, first of all, anytime in sports you start trying to pull the battle of the sexes, there's not a lot of winners that come from that, right? Even if we're just talking about, like, if the best WNBA team played an NBA team or a college team or whatever, there's not a lot of winners that come out of that. If you put Jake Paul in the ring with Amanda Nunes and he knocks her out, I don't know. That's kind of fucked up. I say that understanding that it's just fighting and it's just two people fighting, but no one wants to see. I didn't know this until I read the article about it. Maybe you did, Byron. I mean, he's 6'1" and 180 pounds. She's like 5'9", 150. So he's significantly bigger, presumably significantly stronger. If they were fighting MMA, then she's probably going to annihilate him on the ground and just choke him out. But in a boxing match, reach and strength, I don't know, man. Like, she wants it because she wants the money, but I don't know.
I still think that I honestly believe in her that much. I think she would just light him up standing up or on the ground. I mean, again, I don't know how many female fighters you've seen like live. Like I've seen a bunch live, and I mean, like, she's the best of any female fighter. And that's, I honestly believe it. But if you're Jake Paul, you don't want that fight, because even if you make money on it, it's too much. That's too much of a carnival act in my mind, even for Amanda Nunes. And I saw Jake Paul come out, and old Jake Paul said was like something effective, like criticizing Dana White's logic of going like, look at McGregor's the best. Why would I ever have McGregor fight a YouTuber? But then you're going to mention Amanda Leones, who's the best female. And so Jake was using that kind of as an angle to say, hey, look at, if you're going to send me your best female, why wouldn't you send me your best male? You know?
Yeah. I just think about, like, you know, when Jake Paul knocked out Nate Robinson and there were all those still pictures and GIFs and like videos. If he did that to her, that doesn't play as well. I mean, it doesn't. There's no. I don't know. There's nothing to be gained from that. I don't think.
Well, from Jake Paul to Jackson, Lamar Jackson, we got Poopgate again. We've had to seen this actually with a couple other athletes. But, I mean, there's speculation. I haven't even heard if he's come out. He seems like the type of guy that would come out and be like, yeah, I was taking a poop. But in the middle of a game, essentially, he leaves the field, goes into the dressing room, and there's footage of him going into the dressing room, and he's kind of, it appears maybe waddling or walking awkwardly to the bathroom or to the locker room. And people are taking that to mean thinking that he left mid-game to take a poop.
Yeah, so in Monday Night Football, it's a close game. He leaves the field, was perfectly fine, had no hits, no injuries, leaves the field, and he's gone for a decent chunk of time. And it's reported as cramps. And then, as you mentioned, we see the behind-the-scenes video of him kind of like the clenched butthole walk, which is pretty distinguishable, you know. And then he came back, fourth down, the biggest play of the game. He suddenly reemerges from the locker room on fourth down, throws a touchdown pass, leads the Ravens to a win, and everyone was like, "Oh, he had diarrhea, like he was clearly shitting himself and had to get out of there." Now, he did come out after the game. He was asked, like an actual journalist had to ask him if he was pooping, because I listen, Byron. I watch obviously every NFL game, and then I'm on my Twitter account. It was hilarious. Like, it was the best comedy of the year. Like, people's creativity of the puns and the double entendres. And so it became a viral thing. And he was like, no, I had cramps. And he insists that he had cramps. But it's a lot funnier and probably a lot more relatable if we just think he rushed off the field because he had explosive diarrhea.
Yeah. And then so the other thing is he's being criticized right now, and I feel kind of unfairly by a lot of people. What can you tell us about that criticism?
So Lamar Jackson, just as a real quick background, entered the NFL as a late first-round draft pick with some questions about whether he could play quarterback at the NFL level. Some thought he would be better at a different position, and then some people thought that was some blatant bias against a black quarterback that wouldn't be asked about a white quarterback. So he entered the league with some real scrutiny. Last year was his first full year starting. It was his second year in the league. He won the NFL MVP last year. He led the NFL in passing touchdowns. He won the MVP and led the Ravens to the best record in football. This year, when you win the MVP, it kind of reframes your expectations, right? So now instead of like just hoping that he's good, he has to be great game in and game out, and he hasn't been. And he has talked about it. The offense hasn't been on track. He's blamed the play calling and the offensive coordinator. The offensive coordinator publicly came out and was like, hey, we can only call the plays. This worked last year. There's no reason for it to not work this year. And so people have looked for a reason. When he entered the league, people were either like, he's going to be a great quarterback or he's going to be a complete bust. The people that claimed he was a bust had to eat major crow last year because he won MVP. Now they're looking for any reason to validate sort of the questions about him. I think he's not that different from Kyler Murray. Every young quarterback struggles once the NFL sort of starts to figure you out, and you've just got to play chess. I think Lamar Jackson, they're still a playoff contending team. They haven't fallen on their face. He's nowhere near the MVP level he was a year ago, but as we saw on Monday night, he's still capable of doing things on a football field that very few human beings are. So, I love watching him play, even if I can admit he's got to get better. He's still a quarterback that the vast majority of football teams would want on their roster.
100%. And I just like the kid too, right? Like every interview, everything he says and does. And that's where I always feel like, and again, I know he's getting paid millions of dollars to play the game he loves, but he's also still a young cat trying to figure out a bunch of stuff. And I feel like the expectations that these young quarterbacks are under are just like insurmountable, and then they make a little bit of an error, or they have a couple games and then everybody jumps their shit. I don't know about you, but like, what is he, 22, 23? Probably in that range.
In that range, yeah.
And that's a tough thing to deal with. So I just give these guys credit for dealing with everything, and he keeps his chin up. He always seems to have a positive attitude. I just think it's a little unfair sometimes for everybody to come down so hard on these young cats.
I think what people really underestimate is the mental side of being a professional athlete and how hard it is to consistently outsmart. Lamar Jackson basically has to outsmart every defensive back on the field, every linebacker on the field, and every defensive coach on the sideline, because they all have one objective, which is to stop Lamar Jackson. So it's 1 against 15 every game. And, I was thinking about this. I don't know if you can relate to it all. It's obviously different, but like you were training, and maybe, I don't know, you still are or were intensely Navy SEAL style. I would imagine, I've never put myself through that sort of physical sort of rigors, but I would imagine the mental part of it is as debilitating as the physical side of it, isn't it?
I think it's more mental than anything. And I think exactly to your point, I mean, the Navy SEAL stuff, 100% more mental than physical. And in fact, that's why I signed up to do it, because I wanted to condition my brain to be stronger and deal with adversity better than I ever had. And the training definitely has helped that. And it's helped me professionally as well. Like whenever there's a roadblock in life, whether it's mental or physical, I believe the ability to move through that is very important if you want to progress through life. And I think that's why a lot of these guys, like you hear a lot of them have sports psychology coaches or some sort of therapist or motivational guy or girl in their corner. And I understand why, like I'm sure you got days, right, where it's tough to be on and be that radio personality, and you do whatever you got to do to make your mind okay for the day. And these guys are doing it on a much higher level than you and I, as far as being under scrutiny for it, right? Like they get way more scrutiny than we do in our personal lives. And it's hard to deal with it even in our personal lives. So imagine on the level that they're at, I think the mental game is so important. And for someone like Lamar Jackson, I think it makes a difference between being a regular player and being a superstar. I think the superstars are the ones that can deal with that better than ever. And you hear Tom Brady, I can't remember who said this. It might have been Ray Lewis. They were out, it was right after the Super Bowl, like a couple weeks after, and they were out at some event. And it's like a player event, and they see Tom Brady at the bar, and they go up and they're like, "Oh, hey, what are you drinking? I'll grab you a drink." He's like, "Oh, no, just water." And they're like, "Oh, well, like, you're not drinking tonight?" He goes, "Oh, no, training for next season." That was 2 weeks after playoffs.
Yeah.
But that's how the superstars behave. The mental game on Tom Brady is probably unmatched around the league. And then when you look at someone like Ray Lewis, like his mental game, the way he spoke, I'm sure a lot of the reason why he spoke the way he did was because that helped him motivate himself to get up to play the game. And without that, I guarantee if you talk to Ray Lewis or Tom Brady, like if you're like, how important's your mental game? I bet they say it's more important than anything. Like it goes back to Kobe Bryant and Mamba mentality, right? He said mentality. Right. It wasn't Mamba physicality, right? It was the Mamba mentality, because everything starts up here. If you're weak up here, forget about it.
Well, that's the thing. Like the older I get, the more I realize and the more I appreciate, it's not easy to be good at something, right? Like it's not easy to excel in whatever area you're committing yourself. Like you can have talent, you can have natural talent, you can have a good work ethic, but there's always going to be things that are pulling you away from your focus if you want to be singularly great at something, right? So like when I watch Lamar Jackson and I think, is he having as good of a year this year as he was last year? No, he's not. I mean, objectively, statistically, in every measurement, he is declined or regressed a bit from last year. Is it really fucking hard to play at an MVP level every year, every game of every moment of your career? Yeah, that's not easy. So instead of just kind of sitting back and be like, oh, Lamar Jackson's not very good this year, I guess he was overrated. It's like, well, you can say that, but it feels kind of like a lazy way to appreciate that it's really fucking hard to be great at something. Like it's not easy.
Yeah, no. It may be easier if you get stuck in a bubble and you can avoid all the scrutiny, but the NFL has just come out and said that they will not allow any team to self-isolate or be in a bubble during the playoffs. I think I don't get it, man. And the reason why I don't get it is I feel like every other league we've seen, NBA, NHL, MLB, maybe to a lesser degree, They did bubbles or some form of a bubble. I know the NBA and NHL did. Maybe MLB didn't do it as much, but and I feel like they worked. Like, yeah, there was issues, but I think those issues, like, nothing is going to go off without a hitch. So I feel like the issues that they did have were kind of like, hey, best case scenario issues. Like, something was going to come up, best case, it was those. I just don't understand why you wouldn't. The only thought that comes into my head is like somehow it gives maybe an advantage, like maybe financially or with the roster to do this, that some teams wouldn't have the ability more so than other teams. I'm honestly confused. What are your thoughts on it?
So the NFL has said, just to give the perspective of the NFL, that the reason they have banned localized bubbles in the playoffs is that their rate of infection amongst their tests of all NFL personnel is still significantly lower than that in the community. So their evidence is like, hey, what we're doing is working. Is it perfect? No. Is everyone avoiding COVID? No. But relative to outside our NFL teams, we're still have a much lower rate of infection than we do outside. So why mess with it? Like, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Now, to your point, like, I agree 100%. Like, this is playing with fire. All it takes is one team. We just saw the Ravens go through it. If that happens in the playoffs, everything is screwed, right? Like, everything is screwed. So why wouldn't you put teams in, and bubbles, what we mean by that is like, the NFL is not going to allow teams to mandate that players live in a hotel next to the stadium. Right. So let's say you're the Cardinals, you get in the playoffs, you could stay at the Renaissance there, which is in the parking lot of State Farm Stadium. And Michael Bidwell could have basically said, hey, everybody, we're living here for the next 2 weeks or until we're eliminated from the playoffs. The NFL has said, you're not allowed to do that. I think this is more about the NFLPA, the Players Association, basically not wanting, this is the microcosm of the pandemic government, federal, local government, where the players are like, if we give you this control to tell us where we are staying and when, it's a slippery slope that they're going to try to use that outside of the pandemic of like, well, every postseason we're going to put you in a hotel. And because the precedent was set that we can dictate where you physically are away from the football field, it's why some people don't want lockdowns in any community, because they feel like if the government realizes they have the power to close businesses en masse, how is that going to be used outside of a pandemic? And I think that's probably where the NFLPA is coming from, is let's just not give them this power. We're fine as is, and it's up to each individual to be professional and responsible.
See, that's an interesting point. You bring up a great point that I never really thought of, but I get it from the Players Association point of view. If that's what they're thinking, I get it. Like, you give up a little bit. I'm just saying it's possibly a little bit, and then that could turn into a whole bunch. You know, like right. Pulling at a thread at a pair of stockings almost, you know, like where's it end? And when you're the Players Association and you're trying to protect the players, that's the last thing that you want to do. But it's also interesting to me because I think they use things like this, like bargaining chips. Like, at some point we're going to have to deal with, is the NFL going to mandate players to have the COVID vaccine? And maybe this is in line with that, because I'm sure that they're already, the NFL and the NFLPA are already talking about the vaccine. It'd be bonkers if they weren't on some level. Maybe they haven't dived into it that deep, because maybe universally they're already agreed, like, hey, we'll wait till this season is complete. We won't fuck with the vaccine this season, and then we'll deal with the off season. And then I think it's going to be something that the NFL isn't going to mandate. That's what I believe. I believe what's going to happen is the NFL and the NFLPA are going to come together and come out with some sort of deal. And it's interesting because I think these issues are going to tangentially touch other issues, like any negotiation, right? Hey, NFL, and this could have already been part of it. Hey, NFL, you take the heat for not isolating, because we'll probably take some heat for that. Yep. And we will play lighter with the vaccine. Like, it could definitely be, and I didn't even think about that until you brought it up, but that could be what it is, like bargaining chips being played. Do you think the NFL is going to try to mandate players to get the vaccine?
I don't know. I mean, I would turn that back around to you for a second, because I'm not sure. Are they legally able to? Like,
no.
Like if you decided that you wanted everybody in your office to get vaccinated, could you send an email that says, "Hey, everybody, you're not allowed to come back to the office until you prove to me that you've got a vaccine"?
No, I couldn't do that. And
So
and
if
and the teams can't do it to the players. I mean, a team, a private organization can't dictate how people manage their health. Now, if the government required it, it might be a different thing. But again, then the government doesn't have the power to just blanket it. Then it'd be a struggle between like states and the federal government. And I don't think you're going to see the federal government step in because the federal government hasn't stepped in to date as it relates to pandemic limitations or restrictions. They've left everything to the state. So I think you're going to have the states determine whether someone's going to have to get vaccinated or not. And I think what they're going to do is they're going to institute it and they'll tie it to something such as, hey, your kids can't go to school if they're not vaccinated or something like that. Now, that opens up a whole other Pandora's box, which would require about 30 minutes to discuss. But I don't think that's going to happen either. I think what's going to happen is everyone's just going to say, hey, take the vaccine or don't, kind of like you do with the current flu shot.
So, okay, and if this is too meaty of a conversation, you brought up schools, and that was immediately popped in my head is, why are schools legally allowed to tell someone that your kids have to be vaccinated? If they're not, they can't come here? Because I know parents who have chosen charter schools specifically because the public schools require vaccines, and they don't believe in vaccines for their kids. How is that different than an employer telling an employee, like, you can't work here unless you get the vaccine? I mean, it's
just the simple difference of public to private. Like the government is a public entity, and the government has the ability to, and this is what the federal government does a lot. So instead of controlling the states, which in a lot of areas the federal government can't, what the federal government does is like, hey, we will give you $10 million for your schools, but we're only going to do that if you do X, Y, Z, right? So
Gotcha.
Then it's like the federal government's essentially saying, hey, make everyone get the vaccine and we'll give you the 10 mil. If you don't want the 10 mil, don't do shit. We just won't give you the 10 mil.
Yeah.
So it's something like with strings attached to it, but that's the difference. Like the government has the ability to restrict us in public areas. It's just like the Constitution, right? If you're on private property, you don't have any constitutional rights. Like if I don't want you to carry a gun on my property, I can tell you not to carry a gun on your property. However, the government in public places, you're allowed to carry a gun because that's what the Constitution allows. The Constitution protects you against the government, not against the private citizens. And so that's why private citizens can't compel you to do things. Like your employer is a private citizen, can't require you to do anything. The government, totally fucking different animal, and they can tell you what to do on a limited level. It's not like they can run your life. We don't live in, communist Russia, but they do have the ability to require you to do some things.
Makes sense. Okay, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And so, yeah, I guess following that logic, there's almost zero chance that legally there is a 0% chance they would mandate vaccines. What would be interesting, and you alluded to it, is how hard do they kind of nudge? How hard do they push? How hard are they leaning on the Players Association and the NHL, Major League Baseball, NFL, and NBA, and like, hey, listen, we're losing billions of dollars in revenue because we still can't have fans in the stands. We need to at least be able to guarantee we can play these games. And the easiest way to guarantee that is we need to get everybody vaccinated so we don't have any postponements.
And that's exactly what I think is going to happen, Jody. And you know what the other interesting thing is? I don't think it's something that's going to play out in public at all. Just like we just saw. And the reason why is no matter what you do nowadays, no matter what a business does or anything, it's disagreed with on some level. And so I think what you're going to see is the NFL and the NFLPA try to do this as much as they can behind closed doors and then try to make a very quiet announcement about something at some point and present it as a united front. And that's why I think it's not going to happen, because I just don't know how the NFLPA is going to get all of the players, because there's a lot of players, right? And then a lot of players have a lot of wives or girlfriends or partners and I don't know about you, but I've already talked to people that have very strong feelings against getting this vaccine. Yeah. And I just don't think you're going to be able to get a group of people together. I mean, we all heard recently Tom Cruise flipped the fuck out over COVID. You know what I mean? And that's also happening within the NFL. Have you heard the Tom Cruise rant?
I did. I loved every second of it.
You're back there in Hollywood making movies right now because of us. We are creating thousands of jobs, you I don't ever want to see it again. Ever.
You know what surprised me about it? So I listened to it. My initial reaction was it was way over the top. It was aggressive and it was rude. And then I saw a quote from George Clooney, who I feel like he's a nice guy. I feel like he does a lot of charitable work. I've never heard anything bad about him. He came out and he said he does not think Tom Cruise went overboard because COVID's a real issue. Hey, I agree with him. COVID's an issue, but I don't think that means that you have to be a Karen over it, which is essentially what happened. And now everyone on that production set, not everybody, but a lot of those people are fleeing. They're getting out of Dodge.
Is that right?
Yeah. What would you do if your boss at work spoke to you like that? What would you do?
Well, that's the thing. Like, I have no problem with the substance of his message of like, hey, take this seriously. People are losing their jobs. We need to keep this production going because it's not just you and I. There's other people that are relying on us, and it's important, and there's protocols. Totally get it. You can't talk to other adults like they're your dog. Right? Like, you cannot talk down to people that way, threaten them. Oh, that's just not leadership. It sounded like he was acting, right? Like, it sounded like he was playing a role because you're like, wait a second, man. Like, I can agree with you that people in that situation should be taking the protocols more seriously because this is the issue we all deal with. Like, it's not about me. It's about people around me and other people that are more vulnerable. But there's nothing to be, your entire message is lost when you scream like a lunatic, like you're yelling at a dog that keeps shitting on the rug. Like, I mean, there's no excuse for that. There's just none. I would not work for someone who talked to me that way, period. I just wouldn't.
No. And it made me reminisce back Christian Bale shooting Terminator.
Yeah.
There was a very similar recording where he went bonkers and he got destroyed over it. He got destroyed. Now, his rant had nothing to do with a pandemic or COVID.
Doesn't matter.
No, I agree. I don't think it matters. Like, how come Tom Cruise couldn't have said everything he said, and he could have had a little bit of a raised voice, right? Like, he could have been like, hey, listen, guys, we gotta stay separate. Please, for all of our safety. That's not a problem. But when you go, hey, come on, you're a fucking idiot, man. Stay apart. Like, everyone's losing their fucking job. Like, that's how I envision him just going bananas.
Right. That's the part that got me. It's like, there are so many ways to deliver that message effectively. But this is, I mean, it's the people that confuse screaming and berating for leadership and motivating. And it's like, man, if anyone on that set has any ounce of like self-respect, they're out of there. Because that's just, you can't talk to people that way. I would never talk to my kids that way. I don't even think I talk to my pets that way. But that's how condescending, arrogant, and like disrespectful he was to just other people. And I think we know Tom Cruise is kind of a weirdo, right? Like, I mean, the Oprah moment, the Scientology, but this is the first time you've heard him kind of unhinged like that. And you're just like, well, I guess he's just a weirdo all the way around.
Unhinged. I'm going to leave you with this. Unhinged, Russell Crowe, rented on DirecTV. It's a great watch. I've run out of movies to watch. So I saw Unhinged and someone else told me that they watched it and they loved it. And it's a really, listen, I'll put this out there as a caveat. Maybe my movie watching skills are lower because of this pandemic and I watched every movie. And so now I'm just happy to watch anything that's decent. But I do think it was worth the watch. It was like $4.99. I wasn't mad at spending the $4.99.
Can I give you one movie recommendation?
Yeah.
I haven't watched many, but I just watched one called Beirut with John Hamm. Okay. Beirut. It's good. It's good.
Okay. What's it about? Like reporter?
It's about Libya in the 80s and a CIA agent who is roped back into a hostage situation. He's a hostage negotiator. A lot of good acting in it, and it's not like a great movie, but it's like an easy 2 hours where you're like, that was good. I like that.
Yeah. Well, there you go. You got two movies, Beirut and Unhinged. Watch them. We appreciate the support. Check us, subscribe on all platforms, specifically Instagram is the one we use most. For myself and Jody, hope you have a great Christmas. We will be off next week. Be safe. Thank you very much.